Thank you for joining once again our Thursday coffee discussions, project economy, and how can we do things to better the world. Today is a very special day because we have one of the greatest with us. I think we all know Alex, Eve, the work they've done, transforming millions of companies, touching how businesses are looked at, and for me has been always a role model to look at Alex and see how they managed to simplify concepts that have been so complicated for years. So I'm really very thankful, Alex, that you make the time for us. This is a group of doers. We like to get things done. We probably miss that more bigger picture. We're trying to build that, and I hope with your help and your insights, we can help to get closer to making things happen and having positive impact. So I'm really glad that you could join us, Alex. Really appreciate this hour. Looking forward to see what you're doing with your new book, which are great things. So yeah, I think on behalf of the whole team, we're very, very glad to have you, Alex. Welcome.
Thank you, Antonio. It's my pleasure to be here.
You want to share some slides or?
Yeah, I'll start with sharing some slides. So if you can allow me to share the screen.
Yeah, I'll give you control. Yeah. Make host. Voila, you're the boss.
Okay, good. So let me just figure out where my slides are. I'll just share the whole, this should work. The whole thing. See? Okay. So I'll just share a little bit. So try to keep it to about 20 minutes. Talking about the new book that we just put out, The Invincible Company. I see Eve is also here. So Eve, don't hesitate to jump in, anything to add. And, you know, it sounds like a very arrogant title, The Invincible Company, but it's actually quite the contrary. You could, if you wanted, you know, cross this one out and call it The Resilient Company, because no company can really be invincible, but what you can do is constantly reinvent yourself, right? And I'm going to show you that a little bit, and then we can maybe even, to a certain extent, you know, connect it back to projects, because projects is obviously at the heart of implementing these kind of things. So in, you know, the research that we did over the last couple of years, when we looked at these companies that are constantly able to renew themselves or just be ahead of others, there are three characteristics. The first one is they actually do reinvent themselves while they're successful. When you have to reinvent, well, okay, then you could say it's easy, it's still hard, and some actually go bankrupt in the process. But what is really the characteristic is that companies that are constantly trying to create new things, new business models, new value, they really stay ahead. And you know, if you had done that before, you'd be more ready for a crisis like COVID-19. The second aspect, which is really interesting, is that we believe that the companies that stay ahead, they don't just compete on product, service, and price. That's almost, you could say, the old model of competing. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have great new product, services, and good prices, but nobody goes to a store to buy a crappy product or a service. So what gives you a certain competitive advantage is the business model. So the whole idea is how can you build business models that allow you kind of to protect them. And the third one, this is a really hard one for most companies, is that the really strong players, they transcend industry boundaries. They break out of their industry boundaries. Today, you can still say, oh, that's a pharmaceutical company. That's a banking, you know, a bank. But if you look at Apple, can you say, oh, that's a phone company? No, they're not. Like, they do software, they do hardware, they do entertainment. So the really interesting players, and I'll give you a company that we probably know a little bit less, Ping An, a Chinese company, they really break out of the traditional industry boundaries. Now, at the heart of the challenge of becoming an invincible company is the traditional kind of exploit, explore continuum, or what, you know, we like to call the ambidextrous organization. So most companies are pretty good at this, managing the existing. And there's relatively low uncertainty when it comes to customers. We should know them, the channels, we should know them, the value proposition, we should know them. But the environment there might be some uncertainty, but we're managing the existing. Now, in a context of COVID-19, oops, everybody was disrupted and only few positively, like Zoom or Netflix. So what's crucially important when you need to, find new business models or pivot is your exploration capabilities. And there it's high uncertainty. You don't know the customers, you don't know the channels. You might know how to run a project, which is a good start, but you have to figure out the what. What should we actually build, not just the how? Okay, so that's the challenge that we're facing, right? And if we look at this, and I talk about this quite a bit, so this maybe some of you have already seen, there are a couple of things that are different. On the right-hand side, we focus on efficiency. On the left-hand side, we focus on creating the new, okay? Managing existing versus the new. The uncertainty is relatively low on the right-hand side and much, much higher on the left-hand side because we're going into uncharted territory. But here's a big one, really hard to solve. The financial philosophy. When you have a company, you're quoted at the stock market maybe, people expect you to have safe returns, right? So we're very careful and we don't go into dangerous stuff because we don't know if it's going to work. So that's the right-hand side. But when we're going into new arenas, when we're finding new business models, we don't actually know what's going to work. So we need a completely different financial style. It's more venture capital style investment. So under the same roof, you would have to have almost two types of budgets. One, which is more the traditional execution budget, institutionalized budgets. And on the left-hand side, we need to have extremely flexible kind of project-based budgets that we can invest, kill, invest, kill. Culture and process is obviously very different. On the right-hand side, it's a little bit more linear. On the left-hand side, it's a lot more iterative. And then the people skills. Here's one I'd say people underestimate. Managing a company, a team, an existing business is very different from exploring new opportunities. Innovation and entrepreneurship are a different profession. And just like with any profession, you don't learn it overnight or just in a workshop. Think of, medical doctors. Imagine if they just went to a workshop and then they go into the operating theater and say, oh, I just learned this new procedure. I'm going to snip it around on you. No, you become a professional, a surgeon by going through medical school, anatomy, physiology, etc., until you're allowed to really practice, okay? So we need to find the right model to create great innovators. So that's this explore, exploit continuum. One more thing, and this makes it also interesting, I think, in relationship to projects. Sometimes we say, oh, everybody needs to be an innovator. Well, let's be careful. There are different types of innovation. And here I'd draw from the late Craig Christensen. There are three categories. I'll just quickly go through them because you will have different types of projects and different levels of uncertainty for different types of innovation. So efficiency innovation is all about making your business model better or your processes better, okay? There, the uncertainty is relatively low. I know the business model, I know the customers, etc. As an example, when Amazon tries to improve their warehouses with very sophisticated robotics, artificial intelligence, the technology is very complicated, but the business model doesn't change. So it becomes more of an execution project, okay, where there's less uncertainty. You can still be agile, but it's agile in a different way. Then we have sustaining innovation. If you're a car company making new cars, that just replaces the old cars that people are not going to buy anymore. In the case of Amazon, what I would put there is maybe the Kindle wasn't a brand, something that creates a completely new market. It's just bringing a bookseller at the time into the digital economy. So I call that is sustaining innovation, right? And then we have the more transformative innovation, where it's really about creating brand new growth engines, value in a field that we might not know. And if we take Amazon as an illustration, when they launched Amazon Web Services, everybody said, the business analysts said, you're stupid. Why are you doing that? You're an e-commerce company. You're not a logistics company. You're not a supplier of IT services. Well, guess what? Now they love it because it's the biggest profit engine. But back to kind of the management point of view, the projects on the right-hand side are very different from the projects on the left-hand side. So from a project management point of view, they might be similar, but from how you actually work on this, the uncertainties and the number of projects you actually need to kill is very different. On the right-hand side, we are allowed to expect to deliver on time and on budget. On the left-hand side, we can't ask people to execute a fantasy and deliver revenues from a new idea. So we actually need to be able to maybe, on this side, kill a lot of projects and see it as a good thing to fail, okay? And I'll show you how to do that in a second. Now, because I don't like telling people, you know, oh, you need to do transformative innovation, or you're not doing that today. I don't believe you can convince people of anything. I do a little exercise with managers and senior leaders, even at the board level. I've done it a couple of times. I ask them, what are your 5 favorite innovations in your company over the last 3 years? And I get them to put up a sticky note, okay? So they write their 5 favorite innovations on a sticky note. And then I ask them, okay, can you please classify which of these innovations are pure efficiency innovation, which ones are more sustaining, and which ones are transformative? So they put the sticky notes up on the wall, and then usually have a picture like this. Then I ask 1 or 2 questions. Oh, is that really transformative innovation? Yeah, it's just an idea we have. Oh, so it's not making money yet. Okay, well then it's not really a thing yet. So that's what you start to see. And then I say, well, are you happy with this picture? Is this, you know, do you know that you're actually just improving a dying business model? Because if you're in the pharmaceutical industry, your business model expired. You need to actually fundamentally change. It's not going to be enough to just improve, in quotes, your clinical trials, because your business model is broken. So all of a sudden, companies that have won prizes for innovation, they get innovation prizes because they work on crazy technology. They realize, oh, this is not going to help us transform our company, okay? So pretty interesting way to show these senior leaders that actually the great innovations that they're doing in efficiency innovation are not going to transform the company. So I'm not saying one or the other is right or wrong, just not saying it's not enough. Okay, let's look at the process. When we go from idea to business, the challenge is here kind of to figure out how do we create value for customers and how do we create value for the business. And that is a search process. It's very chaotic and messy. Any entrepreneur or anybody who's worked on innovation knows it's not an execution problem. It's a search problem, right? You have to figure out and you have to change or pivot, to use the jargon, quite a lot, okay? So there are tools to do that, you know, lean startup, customer development, business model canvas. I'll go into that in a little bit. But I want to add another aspect to it, which is also kind of related to project economy to a certain extent. This whole idea that you need to create a portfolio of managing your existing and inventing the new. So you have a whole series of projects. And I would see running a business as just a longer term project, which, you know, with the project management community won't really fly because the project has a beginning and an end. I see Christian is actually agrees. Good. So it's just a longer term project. But you know, a business also can disappear. So it's just a business, it's just a project with a longer time horizon. Okay, so with Eve, we sat down and tried to figure out a tool to do portfolio management. We said, well, it's actually 2 substantially different portfolios. Managing the existing here is a very different portfolio than inventing the new. Okay, so if we look at the axis for a second, I'll go into this. We have a portfolio of exploration where we're searching for new product, services, and business models. And on the axis here, we have expected return. Oh, is this an idea that could make a lot of money? Yeah, very good. It's up here. But this is just an expected return because we don't know. It's just an idea. So we have to look at the innovation risk. We have to test our ideas. Oh, we talk to customers. They don't like it. Oh, not so good. But we learned they don't want this. So I have to gradually kind of test and improve until I've de-risked my business model and it can make the profit I need to make. Okay, that's for the explore part. Then when we come to running a business, okay, now it's a business unit. Still small, it's growing. We have actually something else here. It starts here with return. Now it's really making money. Oh, it's just making $5 million, $10 million. And we wanted to move it up here where it makes a lot of money. But we need to look at this one down here. the death and disruption risk. How likely is a business to die? At the beginning, when a business is small, it's fragile. It might die. So we need to protect it. We need to grow it. But once it's up here, guess what happens? A lot of competitors will come in. And if I don't have a great and robust business model, I might get disrupted by others. I might get disrupted by regulation. So the business will kind of go down here. Okay, so that was just the drawing. Now let me show you a real world example. So we like to show things with Nespresso, to take a Swiss company, and it showed the trajectory. So Nespresso, many of you know, it's a machine, it's pods. You take the pods, you put them in a machine, out comes a great espresso. This was actually a technology invented by a guy called Eric Favre. He traveled to Italy to make the best coffee. He wanted to know, how do you make the best coffee? He created a technology that was pretty brilliant, mixing the right, coffee, pressure, heat, water, and air. So that was the idea. And then they had a first business model. Okay, they thought this could work because the technology is great. Turns out they continued with that business model. They couldn't make it fly. They couldn't make money from it. So the question is, what do you do now? Do you kill the business model because it didn't work? Technology is great. So the board actually brought in a new CEO, Jean-Paul Gaillard, who changed the business model, and he literally himself rolled up his sleeves, went to the post office, sent pods with the Swiss Post. So they experimented and figured out a direct-to-consumer business model that could work. So in the jargon, they pivoted, right? So now we know it can make money, it can make a return, and we de-risked it because we tried it out. Okay, now we got to scale it. So now it becomes a project that goes from exploration to execution. Okay, in this case, same team would start to scale the Nespresso business model, and it became the biggest profit generator of Nestle. Okay, what happened then? Well, they didn't kind of prepare for the expiring patents. So now everybody could put pods into this coffee machine. They knew it was going to happen, but they weren't ready, right? Because they didn't explore early enough. Then they did. They came up with new technologies, new customer segments. They acquired the license from Starbucks to commercialize Starbucks coffee, and they were able to kind of rejuvenate the business model and bring it back up to the right again. Okay, so now if we look at this, what's interesting in this innovation journey, Nestle produced one Nespresso the last 40 years. Because there's one thing they're not doing right yet at Nestle. If I may choose a victim, I don't know if anybody's here from Nestle, but it's nice to kind of take a big company and say they're doing a lot of things right. They've been around for 150 years, but they're not so good at transformative innovation. So let me ask you a question, and those who know, please don't answer yet. But those who don't know, take a guess and type it into the chat window. So if you were Nestle's top management, how many $100,000 innovation projects do you think you would need to invest in to create one mega success like Nespresso? So how many projects? Okay, Jackie says 20. Peter says 100, right? So the image is actually this. Okay, Thomas says 500. Clearly not worked at Nestle yet. 25 from Ron. Okay, 1,000, Antonio. Okay, 1,000 times 100,000, starting to get expensive. Okay, good. So the number is actually 250 projects, of which, a large proportion will fail, 162, and 87 will know some success. Maybe not a billion-dollar business, but some. Okay, so where do I get the data from? You're probably asking, did I make these up? Well, turns out there's a proxy number we can look at. Early stage venture capital in the US, there's a study that shows that 6 out of 10 investments lose money, 3 out of 10 investments make some money, and only 4 out of 1,000 or 1 out of 250 are real outliers. Okay, so down here, we only have one project that makes a 50-time return on invested capital. Okay, so that's a good proxy. And we found some new data. They redid this study, still the same thing. So what does that mean for us? Well, we can't pick the winner. That means in many, many of these innovation projects, the ability to kill projects is crucial. So it's different from the traditional project where we have a beginning and an end, and the end is success. In this case, there's a beginning, there's an end, and then we need to decide, do we invest more? So let me give you a real world case, because this is all theoretical, right? So let me give you a real world case. Bosch has done this over the last 3 years. So if you look at it, this guy here, Uwe Kirchner, he launched the Bosch accelerator program, and they did exactly this over the last 3 years. So they invested over 3 years in 200 teams, but here's the trick, right? Here's what they do. They don't give them $1 million. They give them 120,000 euro and 3 months of time. That's it. And they say, your task is not to build a business. Your task is to test the idea and bring evidence to the table. And then based on the evidence, we'll decide if you get follow-up investment. So it's the typical venture capital approach. Okay, so what happens 3 months later? Only 60 teams get follow-up investment. So that is 30%. 70% of the projects are killed. We could call them failures, but they actually had to fight very hard to not call these teams failures because it's part of the process. These same people don't get fired. They can come back and, you know, work on a follow-up project. But then from these 60 teams, they get 300,000 euro, as you can see here, something like 6 months. They go out again, and the same process happens. Only a fraction, 25%, are actually transferred to the exploit portfolio. So if you look at this, from the 200 we started with, only 15 businesses get transferred. And that's okay. It's not seen as a failure that the majority of projects didn't, actually they came to an end, but you can't call them a success. So some might have gone to get funding elsewhere and so, but this is exactly how innovation works. You can't pick the winner. And that's the big thing, that if you want to do this right, you actually need to have a lot of projects running. All of these projects are about experimentation, and only few will make it to the top. This requires a different culture, this requires different metrics, and it requires a different management style, and probably even a different kind of project management style. So that's a little bit of the overview. Now, just one more thing, just to get a little bit into the process and show you how to make these decisions, and then I'll stop and we can talk about questions a bit. So if we go back to this explore portfolio, there's actually two things a team needs to be good at. So an innovation team needs to be world-class at business design, which means they need to figure out what could the value proposition be, what could the business model be. They need to prototype the business model, not in a big business plan in 100 pages, but on 1 page. And maybe they do that in half a day, okay? Then if they like it, they do the next thing. They go and test. They ask, what are the most important hypotheses that I need to test? They run some experiments, they learn, and then either they change or they persevere. So you take a big idea and you break it down into small hypotheses like a scientist, and you only test the hypothesis, okay? So that is how the process kind of works, and you try to get your ideas to move upwards. Now, if we take a business project, what are the hypotheses? There's basically 3 types of hypotheses, and this we take from IDEO, the Californian design firm. You need to test desirability. Do people want it? That's one type of risk. Oh, they don't like it. Then there's the viability risk. Can we produce it at a higher, can we sell it at a higher price than the cost? So there's the, can we make a profit from it? The money risk. And then there's feasibility. Can we actually build this thing? And most companies, unfortunately, they start with a can I build it thing, and then they learn, oh, nobody wants it, or we can't earn enough money from it, right? So you need to test all 3, but usually it's better to start with desirability and feasibility. So just going to do a quick overlay over our tool that I think many of you might know, the business model canvas. So every business that you're testing has 3, we added a 4th one, 4 types of risks that you need to de-risk, right? That's feasibility, here, desirability, viability, and we call a 4th one adaptability. Is it the right timing in the right environment? These are the business risks you need to de-risk before it becomes an execution project. So it's really more a testing project where you ask what needs to be true for this idea to work, and you come up with all of these hypotheses. So you take a big idea and you break it down into small chunks. And the small chunks, you take them and then you ask, okay, which one of these hypotheses are important? Which one not so important? Oh, that customers have the problem. That seems like a big, important hypothesis. Oh, that customers have this and this type of supply chain. Maybe not so much. But then the second one you need to look at is, do we have evidence that we know actually something about this hypothesis? Oh yeah, we actually know this customer segment. We know exactly what their jobs, pains, and gains are. So then we have the evidence here. Or do we have no evidence? Because we've never worked with that type of customer segment. We've never worked with that kind of supply chain. And you take your hypothesis and you move them over here, and then you just start to test what is important and what you don't know yet, no evidence. So I remember a project with Colgate I was working on. The first time I used this tool, it's called the Assumptions Map from David Bland. They call this the clueless corner, because these were important hypotheses underlying their idea, and they had no evidence to know if this would work. So in the old world, we just write a business plan and make it look good, but we don't admit that we have no clue. So the fundamental aspect of these types of projects is that you have to admit you have no clue. And it's not entirely true to say you have no clue, because here, these things we actually know. So there is an aspect that we don't know, and that's the aspect we need to test, okay? And then when it comes to experiments, and this is the last thing I'll kind of say, the way, and this is a little bit theoretical, but I can give some examples. So what you need to do is start with the fact that risk is very high, and that the only thing that you need to do is decrease risk. And the way you do it is with small experiments. Oh, I'm going to talk to 100 customers. That doesn't cost a lot of money and doesn't take a lot of time, and can even be done in COVID-19, right? Because you can do it over Zoom. Oh, now I've learned didn't work. Okay, I decreased risk because I just learned what I'm not supposed to do. Oh, now I'm going to put a PDF in front of my customers with a description of the project, of the product, the characteristics, the performance of the product. Doesn't exist yet. It's just a PDF, but it looks like a real spec sheet of a real product. Oh, customers don't like it. I just learned what they don't like. So now I can maybe do a technology prototype, okay? So I'm increasing my investments the more I've decreased the risk. That is the characteristic of these types of projects. So at the very least, the project funding is fundamentally different. Project risk high, low funding. The more the project is de-risked, the more you increase the funding and the more you go to technology. So the way we do that with teams is we built this project scorecard, innovation project scorecard. We ask all of the teams to continuously score their projects so we can make better portfolio decisions. So we don't decide based on which project we like, we decide based on which project has most evidence, okay? And then we kind of make these decisions if we're gonna continue or if we're gonna kill. So if I zoom into this for a second, in this project scorecard, there's the traditional aspect. Oh, strategic fit. Oh, does it fit what the company's trying to do? Yes, no. But here it gets more interesting. Now we score desirability. Remember the desirability risk? So if the team has no evidence, it's a low score. If the team has talked to 100 customers, maybe they even have, some stronger evidence, then we give it a high score. So we're starting to score the evidence of the teams. So you can download this project scorecard. I can actually send it to Antonio afterwards. And we do the same thing for every type of risk. For viability risk, did we test the pricing? Feasibility risk, do we have evidence that we can actually manage the technology and scale it? And the adaptability risk, right? So by doing this, you can now invest into projects based on evidence. So that was just a little overview of a small part of the book, because there's a lot more, but I didn't want to overwhelm you. Antonio said it's informal and we have a little bit of a discussion. We put a lot around metrics, around business model patterns. How do you actually come up with business models? We put all of that in the book as well, but I just wanted to give a couple of things that were related to projects, in particular innovation projects.
Thank you, Alex. What a masterclass. And really spot on our topic. It's really the first time I hear a thought leader talking so much about projects, and it's good to see how important you bring it to the discussion. It's something that we have all tried to do in with management, but you're managing to do it. So I'm really pleased. I want to open a bit the questions to the teams, to the people, but I have a few questions, Alex. And I see that if is there. Hi, if. Good to see you. Good to have you as well here with us. Maybe beyond going to the what you just talked, Alex, and if is there, what's your development process? How you come up with these formulas and the research that you do? What's behind that takes, yeah, probably a lot of time to come up with? How do you work with Eve and other researchers to come up with such amazing results?
So I would say that we come up with these, or we start tackling these things based on failure. So every time we can't get a established company to innovate, we ask ourselves, what are we doing wrong? So we don't say, oh, the management is stupid, they don't get it. We ask ourselves, okay, what are we not doing yet to help them get there? Okay, so we kind of take that approach. And then we figure out what are the real challenges that are unresolved. So there's a lot of good literature on innovation. I think there's a little bit of a gap when it comes to how do I convince senior leaders to do that, right? So it's the implementation gap. It's not the content per se. So what we spend a lot of time on is how to figure out a tool. So typically with the portfolio map, and I don't have the slide deck right here now, Yves can maybe show that. We go to the mountains, okay, that's our process. And then we ask ourselves, okay, how can we make this tool? So we actually sat down with this assignment in our heads. We've created a language for doers with the business model canvas and the value proposition canvas, okay? So those tools are good, more on the project level. Now, what about the senior leadership level, the resource allocation? Could we create a language for senior leaders that allow them to manage the portfolio of businesses? So that was our kind of task, the design constraint. And then we sit down and take the knowledge we have and try to figure out. And all of a sudden, a kind of a tool pops up and we iterate that. Then we test it with the subjects, with the leaders, and see if it works until we have something that is simple enough to really be able to explain it in a couple of minutes. So I walked you through this. I gave you quite a lot of content in about 25 minutes. So we try to make it as simple as possible. So that's our kind of process. Take the problem in front of it that is unresolved. We look at all of the literature, of course, first from all the smart thinkers out there. Try to create a tool, test the tool in the market, and that's how we kind of start. It's always that. And then you can see behind me, this is our book wall. These are all the spreads, the pages of the book I just showed you. We tried to make it very visual and simple and engaging. We see the book like a user interface. So if the user interface of the book is not good enough, people are not going to understand it. If the user experience is not good enough, they have to translate the content to their world, then we haven't done our job. So we try to make it as accessible as we can. So we spend an insane amount of time on design. So every one of these double pages behind me maybe went through between 10 and 30 iterations. So do the math, 400 pages, it's insane, it's insanity. But we believe that's important, right, to bring the books and the ideas to the market.
And one more question from me, then I'll pass it. Alex, can one person have all these skills to navigate on the exploration? Can we build them? Exploration and exploitation. Are we going to see like the all-around players? Are these things that we need? Or it's just fractions of teams?
So I think, so the thing that happens, let me try to just share my screen for a second. Give me a sec.
Yeah.
Just gonna try something. Should work. Here we go. There we go. I think you can see my iPad now. So what actually happens when you start with an idea? Oops, didn't work. Sorry. Let me change. Somehow this did not work. I think I shared the wrong screen.
We can Explore.
One more try. Oh yeah, so it just didn't show the right part of my screen somehow. Okay, do this. Okay, so when we go from an idea, right, to a project, let me just go up here a bit. From an idea to real business, at the beginning, as I said, uncertainty is high, okay? So very high uncertainty. I don't know if it's gonna work. So the budgets here are very small. So the team might just be a team of 1 to 2 people who is going to work on this. So we wanna have somebody who has entrepreneurial skills, and depending on the field you're in, it might be a designer, a coder, or whatever. So it's a very small team. But once you start to decrease the risk, you can start to increase the dollars and the team gets bigger, right? Okay, now second round, remember like Bosch, we add more people to the thing. And then here, we might have more and more people. Now back to explore and exploit. If this here is explore, I think, and this is the ideal world, we might have some people here who are professional explorers. That's all they do. They are really good. It's like an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur gets better the 3rd or 4th time. It's a myth that a young entrepreneur, you know, is the best. Actually, turns out science shows after 40, which is very encouraging for the older entrepreneurs here in this room, after 40, the success rate goes up. So we need professional entrepreneurs. But you might actually need to have people from the supply chain and et cetera that come from exploit. So you all of a sudden need a lot of content matter expertise, supply chain, whatever else it is, and that you can pull in from exploit. So these teams are highly kind of variable. Now, when we go back to scaling, the skill of scaling, that might be another thing that is more related to Explorer, right? The ability to kind of go from 10 people to 100 people to 1,000 people. But you compose these teams based on the needs, and you bring in people from exploit. The big mistake that a lot of companies are still making is they take somebody from exploit to run a project who's never done it before. The first-time entrepreneur will never be good at it. And then they put that person back and they take a new person who's never done it before. So guess what? You're never gonna build exploration excellence. So you need at least a small team. Doesn't need to be a huge team, a small team that is really, really good at this. And then you pull in the resources from your company, the branding, the supply chain, you know, all the experts can come in, but it's not the experts because they're execution experts. You pull them in later on in the process. Make sense?
Makes sense. And it's in line with I'm looking as well from my perspective. Before I pass to, I think Steve put a question and Juanma as well. I have more a personal question. I always wanted to ask if is still in the call. It's more, where are you, Eve? What I love about your partnership is that Eve was the professor and Alex was the student. How good was Alex as a student? And second, how did you partner? I think we should have more partnerships like you did. This for me it's something that is not done enough, and combining the students with some more perspective is not happening. We should have more like that. So if you don't mind, tell us this secret.
No secret. By the way, you know, we started to work 20 years ago now, and we still work together. Yeah. At the beginning, as you mentioned, it was students and prof or his PhD student. And Alex will tell you the story because he was hesitating between me and Mackenzie. Maybe Alex, and then I will come back.
So the funny story is that I applied at McKinsey. It was this early morning interview, and it was a disaster. Like, I was really bad. I own it. I was like steamrolled. And the other job interview I had was with Eve, and I was really lucky actually to fail that interview, because I would not be standing here and doing what I'm doing if I hadn't failed at that first interview. So that's kind of the backstory.
Nice.
Since that time we started to work, and we live in the same street, roughly in the same village. And I think we have a meeting every 2 or 3 days, especially the last 2 years because of this book. Because what Alex didn't mention when he explained how we are creating those concepts, or we were creating those concepts, we started to work on this topic maybe 3 years ago, or a little bit less than 3 years ago. It took time. And so we like the visuals, so a way of exchanging information is much more visual. So we draw, I can show you some sketches, and then we try to refine and to produce in a more formal way, as Alex mentioned, for creating this book and the content for strategizing.
So maybe you can share one or two of those sketches. I think you have a slide deck or so, just to show kind of how we work, because I think that might be interesting for people. And I think the reason why we've been working so long together is just because we have extremely complementary skills. I'm pretty naive, I just charge forward, and then you have Eve, who is more reflective and more serious. So we feed each other, right? So it's a really good complementarity that allows us to move forward. But we also have things that are very similar. So we're both extremely visual, and when we work on stuff, we actually draw. So the drawing is just as important as the talking. So we kind of align with that shared language.
Yeah. You have, Yves, you have the picture?
Yes, but I'm not able to share the screen.
I think now Alex is the boss. He needs to pass you the ball.
Okay.
Oh, that is now very difficult. Okay, how do I do that?
I think you need to just send me back and I'll pass it.
I think it's good now. I said multiple participants can share screens. Can you try it?
Okay. Yeah, good.
Wow, I was under stress now for 10 seconds.
You see the screen here?
Yeah.
Okay, wait a minute. I will just change the...
So we're actually working on a book with a guy called Stefano Mastrogiacomo on projects, a thing called the Team Alignment Map, which is going to come out next year, 2021.
Yeah, you told me about.
Yeah, this is the place where we started to work on this concept. And here are the first sketches that we draw in the mountains 3 years ago. And you can recognize what Alex has presented with this the business model portfolio. It became this one. And then in the book, we have a more formal way of presenting. And Alex didn't mention that one of the big issues we met maybe 2 years ago, a little bit less than 2 years ago, was the innovation metrics, the way of measuring innovation for the exploration portfolio. Again, we drew different kind of, and it became something more formal. I will maybe just switch some of them, and just to show you for what Alex mentioned. Oh, wait. Yes, we also met in Dover with one friend of us, Alan, which is the art director for this book. And at that time, we came with the structure of the book and the 5 chapters we have in this one. And then we met again 15 months ago in another village in Switzerland, where we drew the first patterns that we wanted to represent. And we used a lot of sticky notes. This is in the Alex office on the wall, no, on the floor at that time. Okay, so some sketches here. Then we met last year again in another very nice village in the Alps, much higher in altitude, and we designed what we call the shift patterns. And again, it was something with some drawing and trying to sketch out what became this one, what we call the shift. And I will just show you how we collaborate together. You know, for this book, we had a small team working together. You can see in the middle, Switzerland, but on the left-hand side, Toronto with the designers, and on the right-hand side, the people working on the different case studies. And so we use a lot the remote tools such as Doc, Slack, Trello, Zoom. But this is the Alex office. We had some physical meetings, and this is the wall. So the wall of the book. At the beginning, it's sticky notes on the wall. Then progressively, we are replacing with pages. And then the final version, it's become, and this one was for the book. Okay, sure.
Yeah, and we actually, so talking about projects, right? One of the team members was a project manager, because even if we're just in quotes talking about a book, there's so many moving pieces with the design and the case studies that we needed a project manager. So without the project manager, we probably would still be working on the book.
Thank you for the compliment. Thank you for sharing the kitchen and the lab that you guys have been working. The Swiss app is a great place. No, you're always there.
Big inspiration. We go higher every time.
Let me pass on some questions. I just need to tell also, Eve and Alex have helped me to redesign my project canvas, which is be part of the HBR book. So it's still not the level that you see on their pages, but I think there's some alignment there, which is going to be great. So thank you for that. Let me pass on to Steve. You have a question for Alex.
Yes, hi, Alex. Good afternoon to you. It's morning here in Chicago, USA. I really appreciated your 20 minutes, really enlightening talk. I'll be looking for your book, so thanks for that. My question gets to a point that you were making right at the very end of your talk, but perhaps you can expand on it a bit. And that is around how, I think you suggested early on that teams that are working on explore type projects, the ones that are successful that then transition into an exploit portfolio, that you'd suggest that those same teams stay intact. Maybe they add people, right skill sets, but basically they follow their projects into exploit. It seems to me that the project management styles are very different in those two spaces. You might have a more agile type approach in the Explorer, whereas you get more predictive later. So, you know, not all project managers have both skill sets. Teams might be uncomfortable working in one space versus the other. And you have the culture thing around in Explore, as you said, fail fast is the norm. You know, it's rewarded, you know, it's encouraged, fail fast. Whereas in Exploit, you know, it's more like fail never. You know, if you fail, you're fired. So it's a real different mindset. I'm wondering if you could explain a little more about how you might transition from one portfolio to the other.
So I'd say it's still a bit of an unresolved question. So we don't have all of the answers, but you know, I talked a lot about this with Steve Blank, who kind of launched the whole modern entrepreneurial education and movement with the lean startup customer development first. And when we were working on the book and we showed kind of the skill set to Steve, he said, Alex, you don't get it. You know, an entrepreneur is relentless, right? An entrepreneur overcomes every single problem. So I think where he has an absolutely strong point, and we've seen this in the past, but we weren't able kind of to formulate it well enough in the book then, is that you can't just, in quotes, have a project manager in Explore when it comes to building a completely new growth engine. When it's an improvement of a business model, I think project management can work. But when it comes to kind of building something like Amazon Web Services, something that is really going to be a new business, there's so many obstacles to overcome that the person running that really should be called an entrepreneur and not a project manager. And that is not a value judgment. It's just that it's a different skill set, right? I'd say great entrepreneurs are probably almost, you know, a small subset of great project managers, right? With a very specific skill set to do this in Explorer. So I think that is core for the exploration. You need, for the breakthrough projects, you need an entrepreneur who has the skills to do that. And it's the only project he or she works on. You don't see entrepreneurs who are trying to build 5 companies at a time. It's not possible, right? So that's another big difference. And I think the transfer aspect that you mentioned then becomes really important as well, because you probably need to keep the same core team. So you want to see it more like a business you're building with the same core team at the center. But again, it depends a little bit on the type of project. But for transformative things, that's definitely the case. There's no handover to somebody else. What is for sure the case, and what I showed a little bit in my sketch, is you need to bring on a different type of skill set because, and you know, I'm seeing this right now just in our company, the exploration part from 0 to 5 million or 10 million in revenues is different from the scaling part. And if you look back kind of at the venture capital industry, very often they kicked out the founders, you know, at one point, because founders are not always the best to scale businesses. So at the very least, you need to bring on a whole new talent set of scalers. And then when you're actually in scaling, failure becomes a lot less of an option. So the metrics really do need to change as well, because failure then is not an option anymore. We found the business model. We found the value proposition. There's a lot less search. So that transition part is really when kind of search ends. But I think that the danger sometimes is that we do a handover, or that part is actually a very fragile part today. And I don't think we have rock solid experience yet to give really, really strong advice. This is very anecdotal advice.
Yeah, awesome thoughts. I'd love to see it in action. It'd be fun to participate.
Yeah, and this is a big challenge, right? So the big challenge is getting people to understand, or senior leaders to understand, you need many projects. And then the other aspect, that this transfer state is difficult. The other thing, my colleague Tendai talks about this a lot. He says, make sure that ideas, before they get transferred to exploit, they have a home. Because if an idea is homeless in the explore part, they will remain homeless, right? If there is no P&L that will take them on, it's not going to work, right? Or if you're not ready to create a new profit and loss, it's not going to work. That's another reason why you can have really, really good projects that went really far and they die in the transfer stage. So that is a very fragile part that few companies actually manage really well. And the example I didn't show was Ping An. They built a really strong Explore engine, if you want, under the leadership of a lady called Jessica Tan. She's co-CEO, so innovation has power. And they manage this transfer really well. Then it becomes, after a while, it becomes just a business like the other businesses in the exploit portfolio.
Nice. Thank you, Alex. I just saw Richard had a question too. Richard Straub, a good friend. Richard.
Thank you. Thank you. Alex, hi. One point which came to my mind really while listening to you, and I know a bit about your concepts and your theories. There are mega projects running in certain countries, and I think about one of these mega projects is the so-called Energiewende in Germany. Energy transformation, transition, however, ecological transition, however you call it. These are huge things. They are from the concept a project because they define a desired state. You know, they have a starting condition, and then they want to achieve something, to reach something. And in this project, there are endless innovation requirements. And there's a question about how do you get to the right decision and to the right innovation to come closer to what you want to achieve. And my personal observation is it's absolutely terrible how these things are done and managed. And so have you ever been involved or thought about how this type of, you know, huge let's say it's a societal in some way requirement, how this could be supported by these ideas, because it's not just about single companies, it's about even a bigger entity.
Yeah, and I think that's an extremely relevant question that, you know, remember when I was talking to the city of Vienna, you made the introduction and we did a little workshop. The challenge in public institutions is that failure is even less an option, right? Because we're talking public money. Now, guess what? If failure is not an option, you get no innovation. It doesn't work that way, right? So if we're talking about an energy project that we know how to do it and it's about scaling, that can work without kind of going down this failure and iteration route. But this idea of portfolios is even harder to implement in the public space because people will say, oh, but you're wasting money. No, we're not. We're actually doing quite the contrary. Mega projects that from governments that are in the innovation space are actually a huge risk of wasting money. That's exactly why venture capitalists never just make a big bet on a big idea. They start small. And those who make the big bets Well, they're following a lot of people who made smaller bets. So the real challenge in, I'd say generally, even in the not-for-profit space, we have projects that need to begin and end with success. If that is the conditions, you don't get innovation. In innovation, you need to accept that a lot of projects will fail. So you need a mechanism to manage the portfolio. So I think you're spot on saying that if we can't do this in public projects, in not-for-profits, we won't get the big breakthrough innovations. I used to work in the not-for-profit world, in the whole WHO world. There was that project-based funding, which was based on every project need to succeed. Otherwise, we're wasting money. That's okay in execution, and that's how it should be. In innovation, that's the death penalty for innovation. And if you make big investments in innovation, but you're not allowing for these small failures, you're risking to waste a lot of money. So that's why also a lot of public funds go to waste, because the big bet approach doesn't work in innovation. The big bets come later on when you've already de-risked.
That's the same in the European Union, by the way. European Union is a perfect example. And I think these ideas needs to be discussed at the top level of the European Union.
Absolutely.
Okay, there's a few more questions, but we'll try to tackle them offline. If there's something we can do, Alex, is finish on time.
It was a real pleasure to be here. And again, any questions, maybe, you know, Antonio, you can collect them and then we can make a little recording or something like that.
We'll do that. And thank you so much, Alex. Thank you, Yves. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us 1 hour. It was a master class. We feel inspired, Alex. We feel better after listening to you. We're going to get copies of your book for sure, because you are a spokesperson of project management. It has to change the way we do projects, definitely, but I do believe that the future is project-based, and I think that's very, very exciting.
Thanks, Antonio. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody.